Welcome back to our Cura tutorial. We're going to focus on this right side now. But before we begin, we're going to state the obvious. Cura is now on 2.7.0. That's the version we're at now. Cura tends to update quite a bit, so you're always going to want to try and check for updates. And you can do that again by going up to Extensions, Update Checker, Check for Updates. Now everything we covered in the last video still applies, so everything on this left side is still the same. You still have Move, Scale, Rotate, Mirror, and Per Model settings, as well as the View mode, and those are all the same. So we're going to focus on the right side today. So we're just going to quickly go through these and notice how the 2.6.2's version had the printer name, as well as the prepare and print logos on this side, on the right side, and it's now extended over on a bar on top. So we're only going to focus on Ultimaker 2 Extended Plus because that's what students are going to be using most often. And again, you can set up Ultimaker 2 Extended Plus by clicking on this pull-down menu, Add Printer, and then the Ultimaker printers that we use in the makerspace will all be under the Ultimaker tab. So under this first little box here, there's nozzle and material and the profile. Most often, you're going to be wanting to print with normal. So that's 1.5 millimeter. It just says how thick it's going to extrude. We always use 0.4 millimeter nozzle just because it gives you really good quality and better speed as well. And then students are always going to be using PLA unless instructed otherwise. Experimental filaments will all be over at St. John's, and you can talk to Adam Konchevsky about that if you're interested in trying things with different filaments. Occasionally, when you are printing something really detail-oriented, you can go to Fine, but most often for student prototypes, we use normal. And then, as per usual, we want you to switch from the recommended settings to the custom settings. This just gives us better control, better quality, and just makes everybody's life way easier. So let's get started on these. So this is the quality. Just basically talks about your layer height. So how thick the layer is going to be put down. Theoretically, you can go all the way up to 0.4 millimeters, but we don't recommend that. So you're usually just going to want to stick with your printer profile for layer height. However, sometimes we do make the layer height just slightly larger. Slightly larger for faster prints. The shell, as you can see from this little icon, is the outside walls of your model. So if we had that text box up, it would be everything that touches the build plate, so all the walls, all of the stuff on the outside that contains like that crisscross pattern on the inside, if you recall. So as you can see, you can adjust the wall thickness, so that's the side, or you can adjust top-bottom thickness. We don't really play with this. We just kind of leave it as it is. The ones that you're really going to mess with are quality, infill, occasionally speed and cooling, and support. Everything else you can just leave as defaulted, but we're still going to go through and show you what they do. Infill density is the amount of crosses that you get on the inside. So like the higher the infill density, obviously, the more compressed and harder your object is going to be. You don't really need to go above 15% infill density for most objects. Even that can be a little much sometimes. So to save on filament, we don't really recommend going above 20% infill density. Gradual infill steps, we just leave that alone. It's the number of times to reduce the infill density by half when getting further below top surfaces. So it's just like the further into the model it is, so like the core area, the less dense it needs to be. But we don't really play with that. That's a new feature, and we're not going to focus on it. If you click on material, you'll notice that there's only one option that says enable retraction. We always want to keep this on. This just allows for better prints. When the print nozzle is extruding material, the enable retraction allows the material to kind of be sucked up just a bit so that it can travel to a different spot and start printing again. If you didn't have retraction on, it's more than likely that your print would turn out very, very messy, just because it would still be, it would still carry some of the material from the last spot it printed to the next spot. If your nozzle is traveling from the bottom right corner to the top left, it would still, it would more than likely carry some of that, it would more than likely carry some of the filament from the bottom right to the top left, and that just makes it look messy. Speed is another thing that we won't really have you adjust unless instructed otherwise. So print speed is the speed at which, as you can see, the speed at which printing happens. So it's how fast your print head goes. Traveling speed, that just is how fast the print goes from, again, say the bottom right corner to the top left. You'll notice that it's faster. Travel speed you don't really need to mess with. Travels aren't really the problem if your print fails. It's usually the print speed or other factors like the build plate adhesion, the cooling might be too high. There's a lot of different things that could be happening. So unless instructed otherwise, keep the print speed at 60 millimeters per second with the travel speed 150 millimeters per second. Cooling, again, it's like material. You only get one option. Enable print cooling is always going to be on unless, again, instructed otherwise. This is basically telling the fans on the print head to continuously go after, I want to say like the first 2 layers is when it turns on. The print cooling will just allow your print to start to harden while it's still being printed. Sometimes for really complex things, we don't want that on, but for student models, we're always going to keep print cooling on. Support. Typically, we won't have you printing with supports on the Ultimaker 2 Extended Plus, but we'll still cover it. So after you click on Generate Support, you get this little menu that pops up below it that talks about where your support placement is going to be. So you can either have it everywhere that it needs to be. So if you have like overhangs, or if you have like a dice with words in it, we recommend that you print that with support. So you can either have it everywhere, and that would cover basically the entire outside or the things that really, really need the support. Or you can just have it touching the build plate, which we don't typically use. It's more often that we use it everywhere. Build plate adhesion. We always recommend that you print with a brim. Skirts are fine, but they don't really keep your print at as stable as a brim, and rafts are just excessive, so we don't use those. You can print with no build plate adhesion, but it's more likely that your print will experience warping or some issues adhering to the plate. Brim width, we also keep that at recommended levels, so the 8 millimeter. Special modes, so you can print If you have multiple things loaded on the build plate, you can print either all at once or one at a time. So if you had a couple different dice on, or if you had some die on the build plate that you were trying to print and it was all different, then you can print each one at a time, or you can print them all at once. We typically say print all at once. However, if it's something that's really complex, if it's something really complex and needs a lot of detail orientation, it might be best just to print one at a time. And so that's the right side. Just quickly again, we're going to go over right click. We'll make that a little bit, there we go. So after you right click, you can see that you have a couple different options. If I had a model loaded, all of these would also highlight. Center selected models takes the model that you have selected and puts it in the center. It's very hard idea to grasp, I know. Delete selected models. You'll notice that there's a shortcut here. If you just hit backspace, it should delete. Otherwise, if it doesn't, you'll have to right-click and go in here and delete selected models. Multiply selected models. We covered this, or we kind of showed you this in the last section. So if you have something selected on the build plate that you need more of, you simply left-click on it, and then you can either hit Command M, as shown by the shortcut here, or right-click, select multiply selected models, and you type in how many multiples you need. Select all models makes centering easier, makes deleting easier. It highlights everything on the build plate. Arrange all models takes the models that are on the build plate and puts them in either straight lines or whatever's easiest for the printer to handle. So if you want the assured fastest print possible, click right click, select arrange all models, or you can use the shortcut Command R. Clearing the build plate, this is just basically deleting all the models that we have on the build plate. So it does the exact same thing as selecting all models and then delete selected models. It's just a little bit faster. And so the shortcut for this would be Command D. Right here. Reloading all models doesn't actually put the deleted models back on your build plate. It simply reslices them. So if you have a bunch of models on the build plate and you've been messing with the settings for them and they haven't sliced yet, you might, or right before you try and print, you should reload all models. Reset all model positions and reset all model transformations just basically puts them, puts your model back into the shapes, the sizes, and the space where it loaded when you initially opened up the model. So if you had multiplied, it would have taken away the multiplications. It would have taken away the scaling changes, the rotation changes. If it had loaded in the center and you drug it to the top right corner of the build plate, this just puts it all back to where it loaded originally. Group models and ungrouped models simply takes the models that you have on your build plate and it takes them and turns them into a group. So if you select the group, or if you select one model of the group, it will highlight everything and you can change the scale, the rotation, You can move them. It's typically used for models that interlock with each other. So if you had like a peg that fit into another piece, you would want to group the models so that the relationship between them stays the same. You won't lose any space in between them if you've modeled correctly, and they should still fit together despite scale changes or rotation. Merge models we won't really use in Ultimaker 2 Extended Plus. That's mostly for the Ultimaker 3. It takes, if you're printing in 2 colors, it takes the 2 different models and it puts them together. And that's our tutorial. This has been Shannon from Media Services. Thank you very much.